Imagine you're the leader of a small but ambitious country. You need allies. One path takes you to Washington, Brussels, and NATO. The other pulls you into the orbit of Beijing, Moscow, and BRICS. Which choice guarantees survival, and which could trap you forever? You're not just watching the news anymore. You are the news. You've just been elected the leader of a rising nation. The world is calling your phone. NATO says, join us, and you'll be protected by the most powerful military alliance in the world. BRICS says, partner with us, and we'll pour billions into your economy, build your roads, your ports, even your future. NATO today represents 31 countries with a combined defense budget of over $1.3 trillion, nearly 60% of total global military spending. BRICS, on the other hand, now accounts for over 40% of the world's population and more than $30 trillion in GDP. But here's the catch: you can't pick both. The choice you make will decide your country's destiny for the next 50 years. So which path would you choose, NATO or BRICS? Before you answer, let's strip this down, because this isn't just a political club. It's a trillion-dollar business model disguised as friendship. When most people think of NATO, they think of tanks, fighter jets, and soldiers in uniform. But that's not what NATO sells first. The real product is insurance. By signing the treaty, your country instantly gains access to Article 5, the rule that says if you're attacked, 31 countries are legally bound to defend you. Article 5 has only been invoked once in NATO's history, after September the 11th, 2001, when every member state backed the United States. That single precedent is what gives smaller states confidence that the alliance isn't just symbolic. It's like buying the world's most expensive security contract. You pay annual fees, align your policies with Washington and Brussels, and in return, you get the protection of the United States nuclear arsenal, Britain's intelligence network, and Europe's financial markets. But here's the twist: the protection isn't free. NATO membership means restructuring your military to Western standards, spending billions on weapons from American defense contractors, and whether you admit it or not, taking sides in global disputes you didn't start. For smaller countries like the Baltic states, it feels like safety. For larger ones like Turkey, it feels like handcuffs. And that's where BRICS comes in, because while NATO sells protection, BRICS sells opportunity. And opportunity, as you'll see, comes wrapped in debt, oil, and something far more dangerous: dependence. Now, if NATO is the world's insurance company, BRICS is the world's investment bank. Picture this: your country has poor roads, an outdated power grid, and no global investors knocking at the door. Western banks say your credit rating is too risky, but then Beijing calls. Suddenly, the money problem is solved. Between 2005 and 2022, Chinese banks lent $240 billion to 22 countries as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. In Africa alone, China has financed over 10,000 kilometers of railways and 100,000 kilometers of roads. China offers billions in infrastructure loans. Russia promises discounted energy. Brazil, India, and South Africa say, "We'll open our markets to your goods." You don't even need to play by the Western rules. No endless lectures on democracy, no sanctions for misbehavior, just business. For a leader in need of quick growth, it sounds like a dream. You get shiny new airports, highways and railways, projects you can cut ribbons at, projects that make you look like a nation builder. But hidden in the fine print, those projects are usually built by Chinese companies, with Chinese workers financed by Chinese banks. The debt piles up, and before long, your country's repaying Beijing more than it's earning from the new roads. Ask Sri Lanka. They couldn't repay the billions borrowed for a Chinese-built port, and in 2017 they had to hand over control of that port on a 99-year lease, a strategic piece of national territory, gone under foreign management until the next century. And here's the cold truth: BRICS doesn't sell friendship either. It sells leverage, disguised as partnership. So, now you, as the leader of this imaginary country, face your first impossible question. Do you trade sovereignty for survival, or do you gamble on growth at the cost of independence? On paper, joining NATO looks like buying peace of mind. Your flag flies beside America's, Europe's, Canada's. You become part of the world's most powerful club. But behind the ceremony lies the invoice. First, there's the money. Every NATO member commits to spending at least 2% of their GDP on defense. As of 2024, only 11 NATO members actually met this 2% target. For countries like Estonia or Lithuania, that translates into $800 million to $1.3 billion annually. Huge sums for economies of their size. For Germany, which recently pledged to finally meet the 2% mark, it means over $70 billion a year in defense spending. For a small economy, that can mean billions diverted from schools, hospitals, and roads into tanks, jets, and submarines. And here's the twist: most of that money doesn't stay in your country. It flows back to Western defense giants, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, BAE Systems. Membership means becoming a permanent customer of America's military-industrial complex. Second, there's sovereignty. Once you join NATO, your foreign policy stops being yours alone. Washington and Brussels don't just protect you, they expect loyalty. If sanctions are imposed on Russia, you follow. If a military mission is launched in the Middle East, your troops are expected to show up. Take Turkey, a NATO member since 1952. It sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. But every time Ankara tries to balance relations with Moscow, NATO pressures them back in line. In 2017, Turkey bought Russian-made S-400 missiles. The US retaliated by cutting Turkey out of the F-35 fighter jet program. That single decision cost Turkey $9 billion in contracts and access to the world's most advanced stealth fighter. For Turkey, NATO feels less like an alliance and more like a leash. And then there's the risk of entanglement. By joining NATO, your country automatically inherits all of NATO's enemies. Cyber attacks, proxy wars, even nuclear threats. They now have your name on them too. It's the cost of belonging to the club. So, while NATO offers protection, it also strips you of a luxury every nation values: the freedom to say no. Before you think BRICS is the easy alternative, think again, because their promises of economic freedom often come wrapped up in chains of their own. At first glance, BRICS feels like the perfect escape from Western dominance. No NATO generals dictating your military, no IMF officials combing through your budget, just partners offering investment, trade, and energy. But look closer and the cracks appear. The first cost is dependency. When China funds your new railways, highways, or 5G networks, it's rarely a gift. The loans are structured in a way that makes repayment nearly impossible if your economy slows down. That's when the collateral clauses kick in. The second cost is fragmentation. BRICS is not one united bloc. China and India have fought wars with each other. Their borders clashes in 2020 killed at least 20 soldiers on each side, showing just how fragile unity within BRICS can be. Brazil and Russia's economies move in opposite directions. South Africa faces its own crises. So, while BRICS sells the idea of a powerful alternative, in practice it's a table of rivals, each pushing their own agenda. The third cost is exposure. Unlike NATO, BRICS has no military shield. If you're threatened by a neighbor, there's no Article 5. Beijing might build you a port, Moscow might sell you oil, but when the missiles fly, you're on your own. And the hidden irony? By leaning too heavily on BRICS, you don't escape Western influence. You just trade it for Chinese or Russian influence. One empire of dependency replaced by another. And yet, some countries are showing us a third option, refusing to choose, walking a tightrope between both camps and making billions in the process. They realize that in a world split between NATO and BRICS, loyalty is a liability. Survival comes not from pledging allegiance, but from mastering the art of balancing both sides. Take India, a founding member of BRICS. It trades billions with China, invests alongside Russia, and champions the bloc as a voice for the global south. But at the same time, it signs defense deals with the United States, joins Western-led security dialogues, and buys advanced weapons from France. To Washington, India is a partner. To Beijing, it's a competitor. To Moscow, it's a customer. And by playing every angle, India has positioned itself as indispensable to all. India now buys over $50 billion in US weapons, while at the same time importing $36 billion in Russian oil, since sanctions began in 2022. Turkey does the same. Officially a NATO ally, it hosts US nuclear weapons and commands the alliance's second-largest army. But Ankara also buys Russian missile systems, negotiates energy deals with Moscow, and courts investment from Beijing. For Turkey, NATO is protection, but BRICS-style partnerships are leverage. It uses one alliance as a shield, the other as a bargaining chip. Then there's Saudi Arabia, long tied to the West through oil and security. It now courts BRICS, signs massive infrastructure deals with China, and discusses trading oil in currencies other than the dollar. In 2023, Saudi Arabia signed a $10 billion refinery deal with China, while still hosting 30,000 US troops and relying on Washington's Patriot missile system for air defense. Yet it still relies on American military support to defend its skies. These countries aren't confused. They're calculating. By never fully committing, they extract the benefits of both systems while avoiding the costs of complete loyalty. It's geopolitics as a balancing act. Lean too far one way, you fall, but walk the tightrope skillfully, and you rise above both blocks. For leaders bold enough to risk it, neutrality is no longer weakness, it's strategy. But here's the thing, NATO and BRICS know this game too, and both are willing to spend trillions to make sure you never get away with staying in the middle. By now it should be clear, NATO and BRICS aren't just clubs you join, they are investment strategies, and you are the asset. NATO expands not just for security, but for markets. Every new member means billions in defense contracts, new supply chains for Western corporations, and a fresh pawn on the geopolitical chessboard. The expansion into East Europe wasn't only about protecting borders, it opened entire economies to Western banks, construction firms, and energy companies. BRICS plays a similar game. Every railway built in Africa, every port financed in Asia, every oil pipeline negotiated in Latin America. Those aren't just development projects, they're long-term bets designed to lock countries into dependency for decades. You don't just owe money, you owe loyalty. Think of it this way, when NATO signs a country, it secures a forward base for Western influence. When BRICS funds a country, it secures a permanent customer for Chinese trade and Russian energy. And both sides know this is a trillion-dollar race. NATO's collective GDP is over $50 trillion. BRICS, with its latest expansion, now represents more than 40% of the world's population and over $30 trillion in combined GDP. With Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, and others joining BRICS Plus in 2024, the bloc now controls over 43% of global oil production, a direct challenge to the petrodollar system that underpins NATO economies. But here's the cold reality. In this competition, you're not seen as an equal. You're a pipeline, a port, a vote in the United Nations, or a military base on the map. The promises of friendship, partnership, even prosperity, they're all secondary. At the core, you're an asset being fought over. And like any asset, your value is highest not when you choose a side, but when both sides are bidding for you. Which brings us to the coldest truth of all. In geopolitics, no choice is ever free, and sometimes choosing at all is the costliest mistake you can make. So, after all the promises, all the deals, all the fine print, where does that leave you, the leader of our imaginary country? Think of this. It's no coincidence that over 20 countries are currently applying to join BRICS, while 2/3 of Eastern Europe has rushed into NATO since 1999. Both sides are expanding rapidly, because both know neutrality is shrinking. If you choose NATO, you gain protection, but at the cost of sovereignty. Your military becomes an extension of Washington's supply chain, your policies are tied to Brussels, and your enemies multiply overnight. If you choose BRICS, you gain investment, but at the cost of independence. Your ports, your railways, even your resources can end up under foreign control. You trade IMF conditions for Chinese contracts. Different masters, same rules. And if you try to walk the middle line, playing both sides, you may profit for a while, but eventually the pressure comes. Choose or be crushed, because neutrality in a divided world isn't peace, it's a target. This is the cold lesson of geopolitics. Alliances aren't built on friendship, they're built on necessity, leverage, and survival. Every flag you wave comes with an invisible contract. Every handshake is a debt. So, if you were a country, which empire would you choose? NATO's sword or BRICS' wallet? Or would you gamble on standing alone? Because in geopolitics, independence isn't freedom. Independence is the most expensive luxury of all. In the end, this isn't about NATO or BRICS. It's about power and who pays the price for it. NATO sells protection, but it comes with handcuffs. BRICS sells opportunity, but it comes with chains. Both promise a future, but neither offers freedom. Because freedom is never given. It's bought, it's negotiated, it's fought for, and it's always temporary. So if you were the leader of that rising nation, staring at the two phones ringing on your desk, which one would you pick up? This is Empire Secrets. Subscribe now for more investigations into the billion-dollar decisions that shape our lives. Your desire, your empire.